Have you ever found yourself sitting in the corner of a familiar diner, your coffee growing cold on the table, and suddenly realized you've lost the very place that once made your heart beat with excitement? Richard Langley, 62 years old, sat in the corner of his own diner, Warm Plate, the place that once was the greatest pride of his life. He wore an old jacket, a faded baseball cap, and his neatly trimmed salt and pepper beard hid the deep lines etched from years of not standing over the stove, not wiping down the counters, not asking customers, "How's your meal today?" No one recognized him. No one cared. To them, he was just another silent old man, staring out at the rain falling against the window, his hand trembling slightly as he held the cup of cold coffee. Richard once thought that when he opened his 15th location, life would get easier, that success would bring him joy. But in reality, the more he expanded, the further he drifted from real people, real stories, and the person he used to be. That morning, when the bell over the door rang, Richard saw an old man step inside, leaning on a wooden cane, wearing a weathered army cap and a jacket worn thin at the shoulders. The old man's eyes scanned the diner, looking for a seat by the window, and with a shaky breath, he lowered himself onto a chair, hoping simply for a quiet cup of coffee. Then Richard heard a cold voice ring out, "I'm sorry, sir, but if you don't order at least $15 worth, you can't sit at this table." The old man flinched, his face freezing, the light in his eyes dimming. His thin, trembling hands clutched at the cane as he tried to stand, his lips barely whispering, "I'm sorry, I didn't know." The young server turned his back, not even glancing back, leaving the old man to shuffle away toward the counter in the back of the diner. Richard felt as if someone had clenched his heart in their fist. The coffee in his cup had gone cold, but inside he felt even colder. In that moment, he realized he had lost the most important thing that had ever made him truly happy, the warmth shared between strangers. And in that moment, Richard Langley knew he had to return. He had to get up from that corner seat, to save the soul of Warm Plate and to save himself. Richard once believed that as a business grew, the pride of ownership would grow along with the numbers on the financial reports. But during sleepless nights, he realized there was something that had left him long before those numbers could measure it. It was the soft laughter of customers when they received an extra helping of fries for free. It was the grateful look in the eyes of single mothers when he handed an extra pastry to their small child. It was the encouraging pat on the back for young employees after they made it through a tough shift. Richard used to remember every name, every story of his customers and staff. He remembered an elderly woman named Martha, who always sat by the window with a photo of her late husband, sipping black coffee for hours while watching the street. He remembered a college student named Leo who worked night shifts and was always willing to swap shifts with others, saying, "As long as I have a place to work, I'm good, sir." But as he expanded, Richard became caught up in board meetings, profit reports, marketing plans, and numbers. And then he stopped walking into the diner, stopped listening to the stories of the people who had helped him build Warm Plate from 2 plastic tables and an old stove. He thought that even if he wasn't there anymore, everything would keep running smoothly, like the machine he had built. But in reality, everything had changed. When Richard sat in that corner seat that day, he saw that the things he once treasured were gone. In their place, He saw a cold room under tired yellow lights, scratched tables no one bothered to clean properly, employees working with tired eyes and forced smiles. He saw Tyler, the young server with gelled hair, smiling only at customers in suits who ordered expensive meals. Tyler walked right past a pregnant woman who needed help without stopping, throwing ceramic cups into the sink carelessly, shards rolling across the floor. He saw Maya, the server with her dark hair tied up high, rushing between tables, trying to keep a smile on her face even though her eyes were red from exhaustion. Her hands were cracked from cheap cleaning chemicals, but she still said thank you to every customer, even when no one responded. And in the back, he saw Eli, the young dishwasher, picking up broken glass pieces, washing dishes in cold water because the hot water heater had been broken for weeks. Eli remained silent as the icy water made his hands turn red because the manager said it would get fixed next month. Richard sat there, witnessing it all, unable to ignore it. He realized that what he had once believed to be success had turned into an empty shell, and the place called Warm Plate was now nothing but cold plates and hearts closed off by fear, fatigue, and forgotten dreams. That night, Richard didn't go straight home. He sat in his car, parked outside Warm Plate, watching the yellow lights cast faint streaks across the rain-slicked sidewalk, the scent of rain mixed with the smell of toasted bread, frying oil, and coffee drifting through the door as the last customer walked out. Inside the car, the silence was so complete that he could hear his heart beating, each heavy, deliberate thump. He looked at his hands that once flipped burgers, wiped grease off counters, shook customers' hands with a genuine smile. Now, those hands trembled with age, and with the distance he had created between himself and the people who once believed in him. Richard closed his eyes, remembering the day he opened the first Warm Plate, just a small food cart on a street corner. He had once promised himself never let a customer leave without feeling warm inside. But today, he had let a veteran leave in shame and silence. Richard pulled out his phone, his hands shaking as he scrolled through his contacts, then dialed Sarah, the regional manager who had once worked beside him during their busiest days. "Sarah, it's me, Richard," on the other end. Sarah's voice sounded surprised. "Mr. Richard, is everything okay? Calling this late?" Richard took a deep breath, looking at his diner through the rain-streaked window. "Tomorrow, I'm coming back to work at Warm Plate, but not as the owner." There was a moment of silence. Then Sarah softly asked, "Are you sure?" "Yes. Don't tell anyone I'm coming. I need to see what this place has truly become." He hung up, leaned back in his seat, closed his eyes, letting the sound of rain tapping on the windshield mix with the memories of Martha, of Leo, of the tables once filled with laughter. The next morning, as the city lay under a thin veil of fog, Richard stood in front of the mirror, looking at his salt and pepper hair and the dark circles under his eyes. He put on an old pair of jeans, a grey t-shirt, a thin jacket, and pulled his baseball cap low over his face. He clipped on an old plastic name tag he found in a drawer, one that read, "Henry." He drove to the back entrance of Warm Plate, stopping at the employee entrance, taking a deep breath before stepping inside. Sarah was there, holding a worn black apron and a pair of non-slip shoes. "You're sure about this?" Sarah asked, her eyes filled with concern. "I'm not here to watch anymore." "Sarah." Richard took the apron, gripping it tightly, his eyes steady. "I'm here to start over." Sarah smiled, but her eyes glistened with tears as she handed him the apron and a pair of rubber gloves. "We're short in the dish pit. If you want to start over, start there." Richard nodded, put on the apron, and stepped into the kitchen, where steam rose from the sinks, where the clatter of dishes echoed, where the smells of frying oil, bread, and sautéed onions blended into the signature scent of warm plate. He began again where it all once started, washing dishes, wiping down counters, and listening. And in that moment, with his old hands submerged in soapy water, with each dirty plate passing through his hands, Richard felt something he hadn't felt in a long time. He was truly alive. Richard stood at the dish sink, his hands in the hot, soapy water, each dirty plate sliding through his hands, clinking against the others, leaving faint scratches that glowed under the neon lights. The humid steam, the scent of soap, the lingering smell of old frying oil mixed into the unique scent of a busy diner's kitchen. Through the small window into the dining area, he watched Maya hurrying from table to table, her smile never leaving her face, even as sweat rolled down her temple. Her eyes scanned the room, remembering every tiny request from customers, her hands quickly wiping tables, pouring coffee, clearing plates, straightening salt and pepper shakers. Maya worked tirelessly, but none of the managers stepped in to help her when she was overwhelmed. In another corner, Richard saw Eli, the young dishwasher, his hands red from the shifting temperatures of the water, small cracks on the backs of his hands bleeding as he scrubbed burnt fryer trays. He didn't complain, didn't speak, simply lowered his head and kept working, as if pain was just part of the job. Richard sighed, remembering the days he once stood in that exact spot, washing each plate while listening for the door chime, for the laughter of customers, for the quiet hum of the radio in the background. Back then, he felt tired but fulfilled, knowing that every clean plate he washed was serving a smile, a story, a happy moment for someone. But now, that tiredness had turned into a cycle of silence and numbness. The door swung open, and Tyler walked in, hair slicked back with gel, his uniform wrinkled, a phone in his hand. He shot Richard a cold, indifferent glance, set a broken cup down in the sink with a harsh clack, and turned away without saying a word. Richard watched as the glow from Tyler's phone screen revealed a sports betting app. Tyler smirked, tapping out a few messages, not once glancing at the customers waiting to place their orders. Richard noticed Tyler's eyes only lit up when he approached tables where customers wore business suits and pulled out cash for tips. As for the elderly customers, the young mothers, the everyday folks, they were invisible to him. Near the register, Travis, the shift supervisor, sat on a folding chair, eyes glued to his iPad as he scrolled through sales numbers. His eyes flashed with annoyance when he saw Richard carrying a trash bin outside, but quickly returned to the screen. Travis never stepped out front, never offered to help, never checked in on the staff. He showed up to sign papers, then vanished. Sarah had once said, "Travis manages 3 locations, but he only cares about numbers, not people." Richard saw the truth of that today. Travis looked up when Tyler passed by, gave him a nod and a smile, then looked back down, never noticing Eli struggling with the broken dishwasher, never seeing Maya practically running between tables trying to serve customers. Laughter from a group of young customers rang out, but an elderly woman sitting in the corner was waving for a glass of water, unnoticed by everyone. Maya turned, saw her, and immediately rushed over, apologizing as she poured the water, her hand gently resting on the woman's shoulder. "I'm so sorry you had to wait." The woman smiled, her eyes glowing with a warmth she hadn't felt in a long time. Richard saw this and tightened his wet hands into a gentle fist. Warm Plate had once been a place where moments like this happened every day. But now, these moments were being drowned out by indifference and carelessness. When Richard set the trash bin outside the back door, standing under the slanting rays of the afternoon sun that pierced through the leftover raindrops on the tiles, he felt a cold breeze brush the back of his neck. He looked up at the grey sky and thought, if no one stops, this place will die, not because of money, but because of a lack of humanity. That afternoon, the rain stopped, leaving the air damp and cool, the smell of wet earth seeping into the Warm Plate kitchen through the crack in the back door. Richard washed his hands, dried them, and stepped out of the dish pit, leaning lightly against the doorframe, observing every corner of the diner he once knew as well as his own breath. Maya stood at the coffee station, one hand holding the pot of hot coffee, the other gripping a worn-out cleaning cloth. She stood still for a moment, closed her eyes, took a deep breath, and returned to the floor with a soft smile, as if the exhaustion had never touched her face. Richard stepped closer and asked gently. Tired Maya jumped, turning around, surprised that Henry, the new dishwasher, was asking. "A little," she said softly, her voice slightly hoarse. "But as long as customers are here, I'll keep working." Richard stayed quiet, noticing the cracks and red scratches on Maya's hands from dish soap and cleaning chemicals as she held the coffee pot. "Why isn't anyone helping you?" Richard asked. Maya gave a sad smile. "Travis cut the evening shift of one of the staff, said it wasn't necessary. I spoke up, but he told me to get used to working faster." Richard tightened his hand in his pocket, hiding the flash of anger in his eyes. In the kitchen corner, Eli was struggling with the old dishwasher. He had removed the cover, checking a leaking pipe, flinching as hot water splashed on his hand. Richard walked over, bending down to watch. "How long has it been broken?" Richard asked softly. "Over 3 weeks," Eli answered, still focused on tightening a loose bolt. "I told Travis, but he said to wait for next month's budget. 3 weeks, and it's still not fixed." Eli looked up, his face resigned. "I don't know what else to do. The other day, boiling water leaked out, and I got a minor burn, but at least it didn't splash onto a customer." Richard sighed, placing a hand firmly yet gently on Eli's shoulder. "Thank you for keeping this place going." Eli froze, his eyes turning red before he quickly looked away, continuing to tighten the bolt as if no one had ever thanked him for his work before. That evening, the diner was still packed. Richard stood behind the drink station, watching as Travis sat scrolling through his phone in the corner, occasionally glancing at the clock, never noticing Eli carrying a heavy tray of dishes past him, never seeing Maya nearly collapsing from exhaustion as she served table after table. Richard listened to the whispers of employees as they passed by. Travis cut the evening shift without notice. Linda's vacation request still hasn't been approved. My overtime pay from last month still hasn't shown up. Small sentences. But when they pieced together in Richard's mind, they formed a terrifying truth. Travis was deliberately cutting costs by slashing hours, withholding information, holding back overtime pay, and ignoring operational safety. When Richard returned to the dish pit, he saw Maya beside Eli, helping him clear dishes. They exchanged glances, saying nothing, but the exhaustion was clear on their shoulders. Richard stepped up and looked at both of them. "I know you're both carrying everything." Maya and Eli looked at him, surprised. "Don't worry," Richard said, his voice steady. "It won't be like this for much longer." For the first time that day, Maya let out a genuine, light laugh, tired but relieved. Eli nodded, his eyes a bit brighter despite his fatigue. Late that night, as the diner emptied out, Richard stood by the window, watching the light drizzle outside. He wiped the condensation off the glass, seeing his reflection, a tired old man, but with eyes brighter than they had been in years. He whispered, "Tomorrow, Travis, tomorrow, we're going to talk." The next morning, the sky was overcast, light rain tapping steadily against the warm plate's metal roof. Richard arrived early, gripping the strap of his apron, eyes watching through the fogged-up glass. He wasn't there to observe anymore. Today, he was there to change things. The bell over the door chimed, and old Mr. Howard came in again, his wooden cane tapping softly on the floor, his steps slow but steady. He looked around, searching for a seat by the window, his face half hidden behind the rain on the glass. Maya, holding a tray of drinks, smiled immediately and rushed over to Howard, helping him sit down. "It's raining today. Let me get you a hot coffee." "Okay." Howard smiled, nodding, his eyes filled with gratitude. Richard watched, his heart softening as he saw Maya keeping that warmth alive in a place that was slowly growing cold. But as Maya turned away, Tyler appeared, holding a tray, glancing at Howard with a sneer. "Sorry, old man. This table's for customers who order over $15. If you're just getting a coffee, take a seat at the counter." Howard froze, his frail hands trembling, eyes dropping, lips stammering. I didn't know. I just wanted to watch the rain." Tyler scoffed. "The counter's open. Move before someone else comes in." The words fell, heavy and colder than the rain outside. Maya turned, her face going pale, setting down her tray as she walked over quickly. "Tyler, you can't talk to him like that." Tyler turned sharply, his voice harsh. "You're not the manager. Mind your own business." Howard lowered his head, standing up, clutching his cane, shame flickering across his face as he glanced toward the window before slowly turning away. shuffling toward the counter. At that moment, Richard could no longer stay silent. He stepped out of the kitchen, took off his apron, and stood in front of Tyler. Richard's eyes met Tyler's, old but burning with a steady fire. "Stop." The entire diner fell silent. The sound of the rain outside seemed to vanish. Tyler raised an eyebrow. "You're the dishwasher. Stay out of this." Richard smirked, lowered his head, and unpinned the name tag that read Henry from his shirt. His voice was deep, every word clear. "I'm not Henry." He looked around the diner, every eye on him now, some surprised, some fearful, some filled with hope. Richard took a deep breath and spoke clearly. "I am Richard Langley. I am the founder of Warm Plate." A long pause followed. Tyler stepped back, his face draining of color, his mouth hanging open. Maya raised her hand to her mouth, tears welling in her eyes. Eli peeked out from the kitchen, frozen in place. Travis stepped out from the register area, his iPad dropping onto the counter with a clack, his eyes widening before they darkened. Customers in the diner began to whisper, the air heavy but alive. Richard turned to Howard, his voice softening. "I'm sorry, sir. You should never have been treated with such disrespect, especially not in a place where I promised there would always be warmth for everyone." Howard looked up, his eyes red, offering a faint smile. "It's all right, son. I've been through worse." Richard shook his head, placing a steady hand on Howard's shoulder. "No one should ever get used to injustice." Richard turned back, his voice lowering but carrying through the diner. "I want all staff to stay right here. We are going to talk, right now." Travis snapped. "Mr. Richard, we can handle this later. No need to make a scene in front of customers." Richard turned to Travis, his gaze unwavering. "No, Travis, it's because you've been doing the wrong things in silence that today everything needs to be brought to light." The customers in the diner went quiet. They didn't leave. Many set down their coffee cups, turning to look at Richard. A few nodded gently, as if they understood, as if they supported him. Maya stood beside him. Eli stepped out from the dish pit with his hands still damp. Rosa from the prep station walked out. Leon from the fry station came over each employee lining up beside Richard, facing Travis and Tyler. "You cut employee hours without notice, withheld overtime pay, and ignored broken equipment while forcing everyone to keep working." He pointed at Tyler. "And you humiliated customers, neglected your duties, and disrespected your co-workers." Travis clenched his fists. "I did it for the company's profit." Richard cut him off, his voice sharp and cold. "Warm Plate doesn't exist just to make a profit. It exists to keep warmth alive for the people who need it." The entire room fell into silence. The soft sound of rain returned, like the slow but steady heartbeat of Richard, and of the people who had kept Warm Plate standing through quiet resilience. Warm Plate fell completely silent. Maya stood there, clutching a cleaning rag tightly in her hands, looking from Richard to Travis. Her voice shook, but her words were clear. "I've been passed over for the shift leader position twice, without any explanation. The last time, It was given to someone who had only been here for less than a month, while I've been here for 5 years. Travis rolled his eyes, his voice sharp. We needed someone more flexible. Richard raised his hand, his eyes like steel. I'm not asking for your reasons, Travis. Maya looked at Richard, took a deep breath, and continued. I've tried to keep smiling for customers, hiding the fact that we're short-staffed and lacking equipment, because I didn't want customers to be disappointed. But I'm only human. Next. Eli stepped forward, wiping his hands on his apron, his voice hoarse with emotion. The dishwasher has been broken for over 3 weeks. I got burned when boiling water spilled out, and I reported it. But Travis just said, "Wait for next month's budget," and walked away. He took a deep breath, his throat tightening. I didn't want to complain. I just wanted to work, to save money for my mechanic training. But everything here feels like that leaking dishwasher. Travis. Do you even realize that Travis couldn't meet Eli's gaze? Rosa, the quiet prep cook, stepped out from the kitchen, her hands still dusted with flour, her voice small but steady. Last week, the freezer broke, and we lost a whole case of chicken. I told Travis, but he said, "Just write it off. Don't let inspections find out." Rosa's eyes shimmered, her voice trembling. I had to make soup with vegetables that were nearly bad because we didn't have the budget to buy fresh. I was scared the customers would get sick. I was scared of losing my job. I was scared. Richard stepped forward, placing a warm, steady hand on Rosa's shoulder. You've been brave enough, Rosa. Leon, the middle-aged man working the fry station, slowly took off his cap, his voice rough. I've been working double shifts every weekend since January, sometimes 14 hours, without a single dollar of overtime. I asked about it, and Travis said, "We'll handle it." But the money never came. He looked at Richard, his eyes red. I need that money to pay for my wife's medication. The entire diner was silent. Customers stayed, no one leaving. An elderly woman wiped her tears. A man nodded quietly, and a few customers whispered, "They deserve fairness." Richard turned to Travis, his voice firm, echoing through the room. You have lied, withheld pay, forced employees to work under unsafe conditions, and betrayed the trust I once placed in you. Travis gripped the back of a chair, his lips trembling. I just wanted to keep the profits up. Richard stepped forward, locking eyes with him. Warm plate doesn't exist just to make a profit. It exists so people can be treated with kindness. He turned to Tyler, his gaze stern. You humiliated customers, neglected your duties, and tarnished the image of Warm Plate. I cannot allow someone like you to stand here another minute. Tyler's face went pale, stammering. You can't. Richard spoke clearly. You're fired, effective immediately. He turned back to Travis. And you, Travis, you are no longer fit to hold any position within this company. Travis's hands gripped the chair tightly, his mouth set, his eyes shifting from anger to fear. You can't do this. I know too much. Richard stared deeply into his eyes. It's because you knew too much and let the wrong things continue that today. You chose your own ending here. Travis shouted. You can't! Richard's voice was final. You're fired. Effective immediately. No one clapped. No one cheered. There was only a quiet relief, as if a heavy weight had been lifted from the shoulders of those who had been carrying it in silence. Maya stood still, tears streaming down her face. Then she wiped them away, letting out a trembling smile. Eli let out a deep breath, his shoulders relaxing for the first time in months. Rosa placed a hand over her heart, calming its rapid beat. Leon lowered his head, murmuring, "Thank you." Richard took a deep breath, looking around Warm Plate at every face of those who had quietly kept this place alive. Today, we are not ending something. Today, we are beginning again. His gaze softened, his voice warm, and I promise, Warm Plate will once again be a place where people feel welcomed, respected, and able to live with dignity. The next day, the sky remained a pale grey, but the rain had stopped. A cool breeze drifted through the glass doors of Warm Plate, carrying a chill. But inside, the air felt warmer than before. Richard arrived early, no longer hiding behind his old jacket. He wore a new apron, with the same worn baseball cap that had been with him since the earliest days of the diner. In his hand was a handwritten list of immediate tasks. Fix the dishwasher. Check the hot water system. Replace leaking faucets. Inspect the freezers. Restructure fair work schedules. Pay all overdue overtime. Maya walked in, seeing Richard already at the counter, scribbling notes, and stopped, her eyes wide with disbelief. "Mr. Richard, you're here early." Richard looked up, smiling, his eyes warm. "We have a lot of work to do." Maya clutched her order pad to her chest, nodding, tears welling up. But these were tears of relief, of hope. Eli came out from the kitchen, wiping his hands on his apron, seeing Richard inspecting the dishwasher, and asked shyly, "Do you need a hand?" So Richard turned, extending his hand. "Let's fix it together." Eli smiled, a genuine smile, sitting down beside Richard to remove the cover, checking the water pipes, as Richard's steady voice guided him. "Careful. This part tends to leak. Wrap it with this rubber piece." Eli nodded, his eyes bright, his heart filled with determination. Rosa stood at the prep counter, preparing ingredients, listening to Richard and Eli working together. She smiled softly, wiped her hands, and took the new apron Richard had set out for her. "Today we're making fresh broth. Rosa, we don't have to use near-spoiled ingredients anymore." Rosa looked at Richard, her eyes glistening. "Thank you, sir." At lunchtime, Richard sat down with Maya, Eli, Rosa, and Leon, laying out the new work schedule. His voice was firm, yet warm. "I've restructured the schedule so everyone has enough rest, and it's fair for everyone. Overtime will be paid in full, starting this month." Leon clenched his hand, nodding. "Thank you, sir." Maya, "Starting next week. You will be the shift leader. You've earned it." Maya froze, tears streaming as she covered her mouth, sobbing. "Thank you, sir. Thank you." Richard gently placed a hand on her shoulder. "You've kept Warm Plate alive." Maya. The atmosphere of the diner began to change. Maya started reorganizing the service process, teaching new staff how to smile at customers, how to check in with elderly women when refilling their coffee, how to add an extra slice of bread for customers still deciding on the menu. Eli took charge of the dish station, now supported by a new staff member, working shorter shifts, paid fairly, and his hands no longer bled from endless work. Rosa took initiative to inspect ingredients, rejecting low-quality shipments, ensuring every bowl of soup, every plate was clean and fresh. Leon showed a young new staff member how to fry potatoes perfectly, not burned, and laughed for the first time in months. Customers began to notice the change. An elderly woman in the corner smiled when Maya refilled her coffee, asking her about her cat at home. A father brought in his son, who received a small cookie from Maya, his eyes lighting up. Howard, the elderly veteran, sat by the window with a hot coffee, smiling out at the rain, no longer afraid of being asked to leave. Richard watched it all, an indescribable warmth welling up inside him. He had once thought success meant opening more locations and earning more profit. But today, he realized success is when a customer leaves with a smile, feeling respected. Success is when an employee starts their shift knowing they are safe, treated fairly, and valued. At the end of the day, Richard stood at the sink with Eli, scrubbing the last pan, the sound of water softly flowing. Eli asked quietly, "Mr. Richard, aren't you tired?" Richard smiled at Eli, his eyes bright. "I'm tired, Eli, but it's the kind of tired that's worth it." A week after Richard decided to change everything, Warm Plate began to carry a new breath of life. That morning, Richard walked into the diner with 2 boxes of warm pastries, setting them on the counter. "Today's on me, because we've made it through a wonderful week." Maya laughed, a brighter laugh than before, pouring coffee for customers while sneaking a pastry for Rosa at the kitchen counter. Eli carried out a tray of clean dishes, grinning mischievously as he reached for one too. Laughter began to return to a place that once sat in silence. On the counter, Maya placed a brown envelope labeled, "For Warm Plate." Richard raised an eyebrow, opened it, and found a folded note inside, written in shaky but careful handwriting. "I am the woman who sat at table 3 last week, when a young waitress gave me a free cup of hot coffee and asked if I was cold. I didn't say anything then, but when I got home, I cried. My husband passed away last year, and I would sit there to feel like he was still beside me. That day, I didn't feel alone anymore. Thank you." Richard folded the note back, holding it in his hand for a long moment, warmth spreading through him. Another day, a young father brought his daughter in, setting a messy drawing on the counter. Maya burst out laughing when she saw a stick figure with black hair pouring coffee, with a red heart next to it. She said, "The pretty lady who gave me a cookie." Maya wiped away her tears, looking at the little girl shyly hiding behind her father's leg, then gently bent down. "Thank you, sweetie. I'm going to keep this drawing." Howard, the elderly veteran, now returned to sit at the table by the window nearly every morning, always greeted with a hot coffee and a slice of toast brought over by Maya or Leon, no longer asked to leave by anyone. One morning, as he was about to leave, Howard left a small folded piece of paper beside his coffee cup. Richard picked it up and read, "I served in Iraq and saw many things that made people lose hope. I didn't think there would ever be a place that made me feel welcome again, until I walked in here. Thank you." Richard clenched the piece of paper in his hand, feeling his eyes burn with tears. More and more customers began returning to Warm Plate. A group of college students sat together studying, laughing brightly. A young mother carrying her baby received a steaming bowl of soup from Rosa faster than usual, knowing the baby was hungry. A man with his laptop working quietly as Leon came by to ask if he needed more hot water. Warm Plate had returned to its true name, a warm plate for lonely hearts out there. It wasn't just the customers who changed, but the staff as well. Maya was now confident, walking with purpose, organizing the schedules, caring for each staff member, guiding them patiently, always with a smile. Eli no longer felt timid, his hands no longer bleeding, and he began learning more about kitchen equipment. Richard promised to help pay for his mechanic school if he kept up his efforts. Rosa grew more confident, offering ideas for the menu, suggesting new soup recipes. Richard nodded. "Tomorrow, we'll start testing your recipe." Leon smiled more, his shoulders no longer weighed down by fear of losing hours. He proudly shared a photo of his wife, healthy again, thanks to the overtime pay that had finally been paid in full. Late at night, when the diner was quiet, Richard would often sit alone, holding thank you letters, children's drawings, and handwritten notes, reading them over and over. He realized those small notes were worth more than any sales report he had ever held. One evening, as Richard was about to leave, Maya called out to him, "Mr. Richard, I have something for you." She handed him a small wooden box filled with notes of gratitude from customers, receipts with scribbles like "Tip for Maya because she's so sweet," and "Thank you, Warm Plate, for giving me a good day." Richard's throat tightened, looking at Maya. He softly said, "You kept all of these?" Maya nodded, smiling with tears shimmering in her eyes. "Because that's why I keep coming back to work every day." Richard hugged the wooden box to his chest, looking around Warm Plate, the worn wooden tables, the warm yellow lights, the smell of coffee and bread, the laughter, and the people who had turned this place into a second home. He understood that the most precious thing in life wasn't about the numbers growing on a report, but about how you made others feel seen, respected, and loved. A month later, Warm Plate's change didn't stop at one small roadside diner. The change began to spread to other locations. Richard sat in the small back office of the diner, his hand resting on the wooden box filled with thank you notes, beside a list of the 15 Warm Plate locations across the state. He opened his laptop, joining a virtual meeting with other store managers, his eyes serious but warm. "I had forgotten why Warm Plate was created, and I allowed the coldness to creep in here. But I won't let that continue any longer." The transformation began. Third, Maya was assigned to train servers at the 3 nearest branches, teaching them to prioritize people, how to offer a genuine smile, and how to truly listen to customers and colleagues. 2. Eli was enrolled in a maintenance training course and became a temporary operations technical assistant, helping to check and repair equipment at other branches. For the first time, the young dishwasher stood in a meeting room, showing others how to fix leaky faucets and replace water pipes. 3. Rosa was given the responsibility of coordinating kitchen practices at 5 branches, sharing her methods of proper food preservation that saved costs without sacrificing quality. She prepared her clean broth recipe guide, sending photocopied pages to other head chefs. 4. Leon became responsible for training new hires at the outskirts locations, teaching them how to fry crispy potatoes without burning them, and, most importantly, never let a customer leave without a smile. Each warm plate branch began to change. Regulars returned, noticing the air felt different. Employees were warmer. Food came out faster, hotter. Handwritten thank you notes began to appear at other branches. Smiles at the registers and genuine "Have a great day" greetings were heard, no longer forced. One day, Richard visited a branch in a small town. He sat quietly in the corner, no one knowing who he was, just an old man with a worn baseball cap ordering a hot coffee. A young waitress smiled, pouring the coffee, placing it in front of him, and softly said, "I've heard Maya talk about you a lot. Thank you for making Warm Plate a place worth working at." Richard looked up, surprised, his eyes stinging as he simply nodded. "Thank you for keeping this place warm." The warm plate culture began to spread. Gone were the days when employees trembled over mistakes, replaced with, "It's okay, let's fix it together." Gone were customers feeling ignored, replaced with, "Would you like your usual spot by the window today?" Gone were the exhausting shifts without pay, replaced with fair schedules and overtime paid in full. At night, when Richard stayed late, Maya brought him a hot coffee, setting it before him, her eyes glowing. It was busy today, but everyone left with a smile. Richard took a sip, looking at the warm yellow lights falling over each table, over the tired but happy faces of his staff, over the chatting customers. That's what matters most. Maya, driving home that night. Richard stopped on the roadside, looking up at the star-filled sky, a peacefulness washing over him that he hadn't felt in a long time. He realized change didn't start with big meetings or empty slogans. It started with listening, acting, and keeping promises to those around you. Warm Plate wasn't just a diner, it was a community. And now, that community was slowly healing. One smile, one bowl of hot soup, one cup of coffee, one nod of gratitude at a time. That night, Richard returned home later than usual. He opened the door, hanging his old baseball cap on the rack, looking around his simple home, the family photos lining the hallway, a photo of him with his food truck on the first day, a photo of him shaking hands with his first customer, a photo of him beside his late wife, the woman who stood by him in the cold dawns, handing him coffee with a soft smile. Make this a place where people can find warmth. Richard stood silently before that photo, his trembling finger lightly touching the cold glass frame. He sat down on the wooden chair by the window, opening it to let the cool night breeze drift in. Outside, the sky was full of stars, the wind gently rustling the leaves, creating a quiet, wordless melody. On the table before him, Richard placed the wooden box Maya had given him, filled with those small notes, handwritten thank yous, children's drawings, scribbled words like, "I love this place," and "Thank you for giving me a peaceful day." He pulled out each note, reading every word, every pen stroke, every shaky period. He unlocked the door, turning on the warm yellow lights as the scent of freshly ground coffee filled the small space, blending with the smell of toasted bread and butter melting on the hot griddle. Richard stood in the middle of the diner, pausing as the early morning sunlight streamed through the windows, falling onto the worn wooden tables, each chair lined up neatly, each salt and pepper shaker in its place. The bell above the door chimed, and Maya walked in, carrying her gentle smile. "You're here so early." Richard turned, smiling back. "I just wanted to make sure everything is ready when the first customer walks in." The customers began to arrive. Howard, the elderly veteran, took his usual seat by the window, nodding at Maya. A young mother carrying her baby stepped inside, and Rosa reached out to help with her bag, smiling. "Let me get you a hot tea." Eli walked by, straightening a crooked chair, giving a pat on the shoulder to a new employee, showing him how to stack the trays properly. Leon laughed out loud when he saw a regular walk in, waving as if greeting an old friend. Warm Plate had returned, no longer just a diner, but a home. Richard sat at the table near the counter, placing a hot cup of coffee in front of him, wrapping his hands around it, letting the warmth seep into the calloused skin of his fingers. He looked around and saw Maya smiling, Eli smiling, saw Rosa, Leon, and all the customers smiling. This is what I once dreamed of. Richard remembered the days when he would run tables, wash dishes, mop floors, days filled with sweat, but also with hope. He remembered what his wife had once told him, "Make this a place where people can find warmth." Today, he had done it. And you, the one listening to this story right now, have you ever asked yourself, how long has it been since you last smiled at a stranger? How long has it been since you stopped to truly listen to someone's story? How long has it been since you remembered that a thank you, a kind glance, could change someone's entire day? Richard had learned that sometimes the way you treat another person, the way you listen, the way you smile, matters more than everything else you're trying to achieve. And if a small diner can become a home for the tired and the lost, then anyone can become a warm plate for others, starting with the smallest of actions. Warmth doesn't live in grand gestures. Warmth lives in a cup of hot coffee delivered at just the right moment. A good morning paired with a genuine smile, a listening ear without judgment, a hand placed on someone's shoulder when they are weary. If you've listened this far, ask yourself today, what can I do to bring warmth to someone else? You don't need to own a diner. You don't need to be a wealthy CEO. You don't need to be perfect. You just need to be willing to begin. When you leave this video, remember, life isn't measured by what you accumulate, but by the smiles you leave behind. Be a warm plate for the world, because you never know. One day, you might be the one in need of a place to find warmth.